president of the National Endowment for Democracy.
Thank you, Greta and Princeton China Initiative, and thank you, Perry, for those remarks, which actually make a good introduction for what I want to say this morning. On March 10th, 2009, on the 50th anniversary of the flight of His Holiness into exile from Tibet, I asked a colleague in our democracy movement what he thought the prospects were for Tibet to achieve a restoration of its cultural and religious political rights. And his reply was something along the lines of what Liu Xiaobo said. He said that the future of democracy in Tibet will depend upon the future of democracy in China. Liu Xiaobo was just quoted as saying that so long as the Han Chinese have no freedom, Tibet will have no autonomy. Pretty much the same thing. But what I want to say this morning to you is something a little bit different. I want to sort of make the argument that the future of democracy in China for all the people, especially for the Han Chinese, will depend upon the future of democracy in Tibet and the human rights and cultural integrity of the Tibetan people. And there are three reasons why the future of democracy in China will depend upon Tibet. The first is that, which was already suggested in Perry's remarks, that Tibet's democratic model can be a guide and a goal for China. And of course, everyone saw the op-ed by Lobsang Sangay in the Washington Post this week of what China could learn from the Dalai Lama. And indeed, one of the things that the Dalai Lama is doing in establishing into exile a modern democratic state with an elected National Assembly overseen by an independent judiciary in a manner that is permissible under Indian law, with a constitution similar to the constitutions in the established democracies, with special provisions that speak about nonviolence, religious freedom, separation of religious and political authority. That one thing His Holiness is doing is he's not just teaching Tibetans about Tibetan Buddhism, he's teaching China about democracy. He's conducting a seminar in this process of creating a democratic state in exile. He's conducting a seminar for the people and the leadership of China. We think at the National Endowment for Democracy, we think this is terribly important. I'm very proud to note that in 2003, our Journal of Democracy published an essay by Lobsang Sangay in which he spelled out this new democratic system that was being built in exile. And he pointed out in this article 8 years ago that the Tibetan government in exile's commitment to democracy is, as he wrote then, irreversible. And he wrote that the Dalai Lama has embraced this democracy in a way that is leading human beings. He's leading human beings in a way that is far superior to the system that produced him in Tibet, and also to the communist regime that currently oppresses the Tibetan people. And also because of what the Dalai Lama is doing for Tibet and also for China. Last year, I think as everyone knows, we presented His Holiness with the National Endowment for Democracy's Democracy Service Medal. And we did so, and let me just read from what we said at the time, for his contribution to advancing the institutions, values, and purposes of democracy, for giving us all a model of how to practice democracy as a way of life, and for defending the survival of the people and culture of Tibet in a way that has also contributed to world peace and human understanding. So that is one reason why I think the future of democracy in China depends upon what happens in Tibet and how events are evolving both in Tibet and within the exile. But there's a second reason, and that is that in my view, the defense of democracy and human rights for the Tibetan people is a precondition for the strength, unity, and democratic future of China. And here, I speak as an American who grew up, became politically aware in the 1960s during our civil rights movement. And what I understood about democracy and American democracy is that it was not possible for us to have a full and real democracy if we had a minority that suffered discrimination. At the time, in 7 states in the South, blacks did not have equal voting rights. There was segregation, formal segregation. They did not have equal employment opportunities. And there was a movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King, also a Nobel laureate, a movement to achieve equal rights for blacks in the United States. This is part of a very, very long struggle. Obviously, it goes back to our very founding. We fought a civil war over the issue of slavery. So our very identity as a nation is built upon the idea that you cannot have real democracy for everyone if there is a minority that is the victim of unequal treatment, of discrimination, and oppression. And you know, the Chinese government tries to avoid this issue by saying, I remember in 1999, Premier Zhu Rongyi was at a state dinner at the White House, and he quoted from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And he was trying to say, look, like Lincoln, we are trying to keep our state together. He was against the secession of the South. He fought a war. We are doing the same thing as Lincoln did. And to try to identify, he tried explicitly by quoting from the Gettysburg Address to identify with that tradition of Abraham Lincoln. But the difference, of course, is that Lincoln fought to keep the Union together, and even to the point of fighting a civil war, in order to fulfill the promise of our Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he kept the Union together and fought a civil war in order to advance freedom. China is behaving in a way that is repressing freedom, repressing rights, and just using this as a rationale, the idea that somehow the real purpose here is just to keep China together, to justify what they're doing. And of course, it's not helping China, and it's not even helping to keep China together. Following the Lhasa uprising in March of 2008, 29 Chinese intellectuals, including Liu Xiaobo, signed a statement. And I want to read just a couple of quick passages from that statement, because I think it underlines how the way the Chinese government treats Tibet hurts China, hurts territorial integrity, national unity, national strength, hurts the whole of the country. They wrote that the kind of propaganda, the one-sided propaganda that the regime uses against Tibet stirs up interethnic animosity and is therefore extremely detrimental to the long-term goal of safeguarding national unity. That the use of cultural revolutionary language in depicting the Dalai Lama in a very negative way hurts China's image. And if China wants to integrate into the international community, it should act in a way that conforms to the standards of modern civilization. And they concluded the statement by saying that a country that wishes to avoid partition of its territory, a country that wishes to avoid partition of its territory must first avoid divisiveness among its nationalities. And by contributing to that divisiveness, which is what they do by denying the rights of the Tibetan people, they're actually hurting the territorial integrity of China. In other words, it is only through the respect for the Tibetan rights that China can achieve respect and unity. Again, how China is right, the future is dependent on Tibet. And finally, the last point is the whole idea of universal values. The movement in China for democracy is based upon the notion of universal values. It's sort of the people who believe in a democratic future for China identify with universal values as opposed to others who somehow support what they call the China model. And the point of universal values is that in response partly, I suppose, to Lee Kuan Yew and the notion of Asian values, that democracy is not a Western idea, but it's something for everyone. And if it's for everyone, then obviously it has to be not just for the majority, but for the minority as well. And obviously, as was already suggested by Liu Xiaobo and Perry Link, the leading voice in China for the idea of universal values is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. His own acceptance speech when he received the Nobel Peace Prize said that it is human nature to want freedom. It is part of human nature. He's also said that this is consistent with the Buddhist tradition, and he has said that the institutions that derive from democratic values are nothing less than the necessary conditions of a civilized society. And therefore, there's a consistency here that the people in China that want democracy and freedom and speak about universal values obviously also have to embrace the rights of the Tibetans. It's not just for themselves, if these values are universal, it's for everyone. And China will only realize its great potential if it embraces these values, and it cannot embrace these values without listening to the Dalai Lama's words, watching and actually following his actions, especially the actions of creating a democratic government in exile with the separation of religious and political authority, and ultimately respecting and achieving a reconciliation with the people of Tibet. It's not just Tibetan rights and freedoms that are at stake in this. It's also, what also is at issue are the rights and freedoms of the Han majority, who are also victims of totalitarianism and the spiritual disaster it inflicts on all of its subjects. Tibet, of course, needs a democratic China, but a democratic China is not possible without a free Tibet. The struggle, in other words, is indivisible, and if this struggle is based on common and universal values, then I believe it surely will be a struggle that will be won. Thank you.